All right, welcome to another episode of The Deep Dive. Today, we are taking a deep dive into one of the most popular works of Shakespeare, A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Uh-huh.
We've got a lot of cool digitized sources from libraries, different stuff like introductions from scholars and the original text of the play and helpful little footnotes.
Right.
We really want to dig into this
Yeah.
and figure out, when this play came about, how it's structured, what the plot is, what the big ideas are, why it still resonates with us today.
Absolutely.
So first off, let's talk origins. When was A Midsummer Night's Dream written?
Well, it's interesting because the text we have today, it seems like the play was put together from a couple of early printings. So figuring out that exact date of creation, that's a bit of a scholarly mystery.
Yeah, like a literary puzzle, right?
Right. But one of the first solid clues we have is a reference in a book from 1598 called Pilatus Tamia by Francis Mears. And Pilatus Tamia was a pretty important survey of literature of the time. So the fact that A Midsummer Night's Dream is mentioned in it definitely tells us that the play was around by then. But narrowing down that exact year, well, there's been a bunch of different dates proposed by scholars. Mr. Drake thought it was 1593, Mr. Chalmers put it at 1598, Malone preferred 1594, Delius thought it was even later than 1594, and then Flea proposed 1592, even earlier.
Wow. So like a whole range of potential dates there. What kind of evidence do we have to sort of narrow that down and to give our listeners an idea of when this was probably written?
Well, I think the most convincing clue is actually in the play itself. Remember in Act 2 when Titania describes all that terrible weather?
Yeah.
When nature is all out of whack and crops are rotting and people getting sick?
Yes, a very vivid description of chaos in nature.
Exactly. And the interesting thing is there are historical records from England that show 1593 and 1594 were years with some really awful weather. So the fact that Titania's description lines up with those real-world events seems to suggest pretty strongly that Shakespeare was writing with those fresh in his mind. So that kind of pushes us towards that 1593, 1594 window.
Oh, I see. So like Shakespeare was tapping into the kind of current events, the things that people were experiencing at the time to make the play relevant.
Right, exactly.
So that's one clue. But are there any other kind of hints within the text of the play itself that give us an idea of when it might have been written?
Yeah, there are a couple lines in Act V that might be referencing other literary works or events. Some scholars believe that lines 52 and 53 could be allusions to Spenser's poem, The Tears of the Muses, which was published in 1591.
Okay.
Or maybe even to the death of the playwright Robert Greene in 1592. Now, these are obviously a bit more subtle and open to interpretation, but they definitely add another layer to that whole puzzle of dating the play.
Yeah, they're like little historical Easter eggs or something.
Oh.
Now, the notes also mention these metrical tests that scholars use to date Shakespeare's work. What are those?
Okay, so metrical tests, those can sound a bit technical, but it's basically looking at the musicality of Shakespeare's poetry and how that changed over his career.
Right.
One way to do that is by looking at how lines end. So for example, later in his career, Shakespeare used more lines that ended with a kind of soft, unstressed syllable. We call these weak endings, or sometimes feminine endings.
Okay.
Now, by looking at how often these weak endings appear in A Midsummer Night's Dream and comparing that to other plays that we have a better sense of when they were written, scholars can kind of build a chronological map of his writing. And these tests tend to put A Midsummer Night's Dream around 1595.
Oh, I see. So it's like using the evolution of his style to pinpoint the date.
Yeah, exactly, like literary forensics.
So taking all these clues together, the weather, the potential allusions, the metrical tests, it seems like the mid-1590s is the most likely period for when A Midsummer Night's Dream was written.
Uh-huh.
The notes also mention something about flattery towards Queen Elizabeth. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. There's a pretty strong consensus among scholars that the play contains some very elegant and clear flattery aimed at Queen Elizabeth, which, to be fair, was a common practice for playwrights at that time, especially if they wanted their work to be performed at court or, for important people.
Right. So we've got this time frame now for when it was written. What about the time frame of the play itself? Like how much time passes over the course of the story?
Right. Well, the action in the play happens over 3 days. It all culminates on the night of the new moon.
Okay.
But it's funny because there's actually a bit of a timeline hiccup between Act 1 and Act 3. The initial sense of time doesn't quite match up with some of the later discussions, especially amongst the mechanicals, those sort of, working class characters.
Yeah. So even Shakespeare had his little continuity errors. It's kind of endearing in a way. Before we dive into the actual story, the notes also mention some interesting structural details like the number of lines and this thing called time analysis. Can you break that down for us a bit?
Yeah, sure. So there's this guy, Mr. Flay, who counted every single line in the play. There are 100 and 251 lines in total.
Wow.
Of those, 441 are in prose, which is like the everyday language that Bottom and his crew use a lot. And then 878 lines are in blank verse, which is that unrhymed poetry that sounds natural, that's often used for more serious or elevated dialogue.
Okay.
He also cataloged all the different rhymes and songs in the play, which gives us a sense of the kind of range of tools Shakespeare was working with in terms of language.
And what about this time analysis thing? What is that all about?
Well, Mr. Daniel basically did a super detailed breakdown of the play's action, almost like minute by minute, or more like scene by scene, across those 3 days. So Act 1 is day 1, Acts 2 and 3, along with the beginning of Act 4, take place on day 2, and then the rest of Act 4 and all of Act V finish up on day 3. It just shows how much this play has been studied and how people have tried to figure out the logic behind it.
So we've got a handle on when the play was written and kind of the structural timeline of it.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about where Shakespeare might have gotten his inspiration for this whole fairy world and these Athenian lovers. Was this all just straight from his imagination?
Well, it is a unique combination of characters and events, that's for sure. But you gotta remember that Shakespeare was really good at taking existing stories and traditions and kind of weaving them together in new ways. Playwrights back then, they borrowed all the time. And Shakespeare was no exception.
Right.
So, for example, the characters of Theseus and Hippolyta, they come from Greek mythology. Shakespeare would have known their story from North's translation of Plutarch's Lives, specifically the life of Theseus.
Okay.
And he might have also known Chaucer's Knight's Tale, which also features Theseus and his court.
Oh.
So he was pulling from these classical sources to establish the setting and some of the key figures.
So he's already blending these different worlds right from the start.
Yeah.
What about the play within a play? Either the story of Pyramus and Thisbe. It seems like he was kind of poking fun at a more serious story.
You're right. That play within a play is a great example of Shakespeare taking a well-known tragic love story and turning it into this hilarious comedy.
Right.
He most likely got the story from Arthur Golding's translation of Ovid's Metamorphoses, which was a really popular book at the time.
Good.
It has this super vivid telling of the Pyramus and Thisbe myth. And he might have also known Chaucer's version of the tale from The Legend of Good Women, which is called Thisbe of Babylon. But Shakespeare takes this tragic love story and puts it in the hands of these clumsy mechanicals, and it just creates this amazing comedic effect.
Yeah, so highbrow meets lowbrow. It's brilliant. Now, the fairies, like Puck, Oberon, and Titania, they feel very much rooted in English folklore, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Fairies and these sorts of mischievous spirits were super common in traditional English tales. And Puck, or Robin Goodfellow as he's sometimes called, he's a classic example of that.
Okay.
Now, it's interesting, there's this idea that the character of Oberon, the fairy king, might have been inspired by a character in another play that was popular at the time, Robert Greene's James I of Scotland. So we're seeing this blend of local folklore and maybe some borrowing from other contemporary works.
Yeah, it's like he's taking all these different pieces and creating something entirely new.
Right.
Exactly. Now, the notes also mention that A Midsummer Night's Dream hasn't always been a constant presence on stage. And it said that audiences respond to different characters in different ways. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. It seems like the more idealized characters in the play, like the young lovers, Theseus, Hippolyta, they haven't always connected with audiences in the way that Shakespeare might have intended. Yeah, there's this idea that because they're so perfect and archetypal, it's harder for people to really see them as, relatable human beings.
I see. They're almost like figures in a fairy tale or something.
Right. And the notes contrast those characters with the mechanicals, especially Bottom, who have this really enduring appeal.
Oh, right, yeah.
Bottom and his crew, they bring this sort of everyday working class energy to the play. They're worried about their costumes and their lines and whether people are going to be scared by the lion in their play. It's those very human flaws and anxieties that make them so relatable and funny.
Right.
And the notes pointed out that they use this language that's very much like the everyday speech of people from Warwickshire, which is where Shakespeare grew up. So it's like he's bringing a bit of his own background into the play.
Oh, so they're the heart of the play in a way.
Mm-hmm.
They ground it in reality. Okay, let's talk plot.
Yeah.
We've got these multiple storylines happening all at once. Let's start with the 4 young Athenian lovers.
Okay.
Where does all this romantic chaos begin?
Well, the play opens with this big wedding about to happen. Duke Theseus is getting married to Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. And this marriage symbolizes like order and resolution.
Right.
But right away, we run into conflict. This guy Aegeus comes in, and he's demanding that his daughter Hermia marry this guy Demetrius.
Oh.
But the problem is, Hermia is in love with Lysander. So instant drama.
That's never good. How does Hermia react to her dad's demands?
She's not having it.
Good for her.
She says she'd rather die or become a nun than marry Demetrius.
Wow.
And Lysander, he's just as devoted to her. So they come up with this plan to run away to his aunt's house, where they'll be outside of the Duke's reach.
Bold move.
Yeah.
Now, what about Helena? Where'd she fit into all of this?
Helena. So she's in love with Demetrius, but he's not interested in her anymore. The notes point out that he used to like her, but now he's all about Hermia.
Ouch.
Yeah, poor Helena.
So what does she do?
Well, she makes a pretty big decision. She decides to tell Demetrius about Hermia and Lysander's plan to run away, hoping that he'll be grateful and start liking her again.
Oh, boy. That's not going to end well. So now what happens?
Well, Demetrius, he's obsessed with Hermia, so he takes off after them into the woods. And Helena, she's so desperate for Demetrius to even look at her, she follows him too. So now you've got all four of them running around in these woods, which also happen to be the realm of the fairies.
Oh, right. So now we bring in the fairy royalty, Oberon and Titania.
Yeah.
What's their problem? Why are they fighting?
So Oberon and Titania, the king and queen of the fairies, are having this big fight, and it's all because of this little Indian boy that Titania has taken under her care. Oberon is super jealous, and he wants the boy for himself, but Titania's like, no way, he's mine.
A fairy custody battle.
Pretty much. And the thing is, their fight is actually messing up the natural world. Titania describes how the seasons are all mixed up, there are frosts in the summer, flowers blooming in the winter, harvests are failing. Their personal drama is creating, like, ecological chaos.
High stakes. So how does Oberon try to fix this, or at least get what he wants?
Well, he decides to use this magical love potion called Love and Idleness.
The famous love potion?
Yep. And the notes mention that Love and Idleness is actually another name for the pansy flower.
Interesting.
And there's this whole backstory about how the potion was created when Cupid's arrow, which was aimed at a fair vestal throned by the west, which everyone thinks is supposed to be Queen Elizabeth,
Right.
missed its target and hit this little white flower, which then turned purple from love's magic.
So Oberon's going to use this potion on Titania.
Exactly. His plan is to put some of the juice on her eyelids while she's sleeping. That way, when she wakes up, the first thing she sees, she'll fall head over heels in love with.
Classic fairy mischief.
Yeah.
But I have a feeling things aren't going to go exactly according to plan, right?
You know it. Oberon tells Puck, his little helper fairy, Robin Goodfellow, to go find Demetrius and put the love potion on his eyes so that he'll fall back in love with Helena.
Okay.
But Puck, he's either being mischievous or he just gets confused in the dark, but he ends up putting the potion on Lysander's eyes instead.
Oh no, poor Lysander.
So Lysander wakes up, and of course the first person he sees is Helena, and he falls instantly and passionately in love with her.
Yikes.
Yeah, and Helena is just totally confused. She thinks Lysander is making fun of her.
Of course. And then what happens?
Well, then Demetrius shows up, still chasing after Hermia, and Oberon, he realizes Puck messed up, so he puts the potion on Demetrius's eyes too. So now both Lysander and Demetrius are madly in love with Helena.
It's like a love potion-fueled soap opera. So how does this whole mess get sorted out?
Well, Hermia's obviously heartbroken and confused, and all four of them are running around the woods, fighting and arguing. It's chaos.
Yeah.
But eventually Oberon feels bad, especially since Titania has now fallen in love with something pretty ridiculous, as we'll see later.
Oh yeah.
So he uses another potion to reverse the spell on Lysander, so he goes back to loving Hermia. But Demetrius stays under the influence of the potion, and he's still in love with Helena.
Okay, so it's not exactly the original pairings, but at least everyone's in love with someone who loves them back.
Exactly. A happy ending, even if it's a little bit manipulated.
Right. And how do the lovers explain all of this craziness once they wake up?
They basically just think it was all a weird dream.
Yeah, that makes sense.
When they're found in the woods by Theseus and his hunting party, Theseus decides to overrule Aegeus and let Hermia marry Lysander. And Demetrius, he's happy with Helena now anyway.
Okay, so romantic crisis averted. Now, let's talk about Titania and her unfortunate love interest. This is where those amateur actors come in, right?
Right. So we've got this group of Athenian tradesmen. Peter Quince the carpenter, Nick Bottom the weaver, Francis Flute the bellows mender, Tom Snout the tinker, Robin Starveling the tailor.
Quite the crew.
Right. And they're super excited because they're putting on a play called The Most Lamentable Comedy and Most Cruel Death of Pyramus and Thisbe, which they hope to perform at the Duke's wedding.
Very Shakespearean.
Right. And Nick Bottom, he's just so enthusiastic. He wants to play all the parts. He thinks he's this amazing actor who can make the audience laugh and cry at the same time.
I love him.
He's hilarious.
So where do they rehearse this masterpiece?
Well, they decide to practice in the woods, to get away from prying eyes and to be able to rehearse under the moonlight.
Of course. So they wander into the same enchanted woods as the lovers.
Right, and this is where Puck comes in again. Oberon's told him to create a bit of chaos, and Puck sees Bottom and his friends rehearsing.
And knowing Puck, he can't resist a little prank.
Exactly. So Puck, he uses his magic to give Bottom the head of a donkey.
Oh no, poor Bottom.
The other actors are terrified and they all run away, but Bottom, he has no idea what's happened. He just keeps on rehearsing his lines.
Oh, that's perfect.
And then Titania, who's still under the influence of the love potion, she wakes up.
Oh, this is it.
And she sees Bottom with his donkey head singing these really off-key songs. And she falls madly in love with him. She thinks he's the most beautiful creature she's ever seen.
I can just imagine how ridiculous this must look.
It's pure comedic gold.
What does Oberon think of all this?
Well, at first he finds it pretty funny, but eventually he starts to feel sorry for Titania. So he uses another potion to break the spell. Titania wakes up, sees Bottom with his donkey head, and is completely mortified.
She's probably wondering what she was thinking.
Right. And Bottom, he wakes up and he's totally confused. He remembers bits and pieces of what happened, but it all seems like a dream.
A very strange dream.
Definitely. And then finally, the mechanicals get to perform their play for the Duke and his court. Bottom's back to his human self.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
So how does the play go?
It is a complete disaster.
In the best way possible.
Oh yeah. They mess up their lines, mispronounce words, Bottom especially. He keeps using words that sound kind of similar to the right word, but they mean something totally different.
Oh yeah, the malapropisms.
Exactly.
It's one of the funniest things about the play.
It's hilarious. And the whole time, Theseus and Hippolyta and the other courtiers are watching and making all these sarcastic comments.
Yeah, so it's like a comedy within a comedy.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about the lovers and the mechanicals. Let's talk a bit more about the fairies themselves. What's important to understand about them and their role in the play?
Okay.
Well, I think it's important to remember that they represent these powerful forces of nature, especially Oberon and Titania.
Okay.
They can be unpredictable, even dangerous. And Puck, or Robin Goodfellow,
Yeah.
he represents that sort of mischievous trickster energy that was common in English folklore.
Right. And even though they're separate from the human world, they definitely have an effect on it, don't they?
Absolutely. The fact that Oberon and Titania's fight messes up the seasons shows just how interconnected the two worlds are. And then Oberon using that love potion on the humans, that really shows how they can influence human emotions and actions. And then at the end, the fairies come and bless the palace and the newly married couple.
Oh, right, yeah.
It's like they're restoring balance and harmony between the human world and the fairy world.
So it's more than just a whimsical fairy tale.
Right,
There's
yeah.
some real depth there.
Yeah.
So beyond the plot, what are some of the big ideas that A Midsummer Night's Dream is exploring?
Well, one of the most obvious themes is love. But the play presents love as something that's not always rational or sensible. It can be impulsive, transformative, and often driven by imagination.
Right.
You remember that famous line, love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind?
Oh, yeah, from Helena.
Yeah.
Right.
That line really captures the idea that love can be blind, it can make us do crazy things, and it can even make us fall for people who are, well, maybe not the most obvious choice.
Right. And it's not just romantic love that's driven by imagination.
Right. Imagination is a big theme throughout the play. It drives the lover's actions, it fuels the magic of the fairies, and it's also essential to the creation and appreciation of art.
Like with the Mechanicals play.
Exactly. And the play itself is a product of imagination, right? It's this whole world that Shakespeare was created for us to get lost in.
And he constantly blurs the lines between what's real and what's imagined, doesn't he?
Absolutely. There's this constant interplay between reality and fantasy. The characters have these vivid dreams, the fairies have real magical powers, and the whole play makes you question what's actually real.
Yeah, it leaves you with a sense of wonder.
Yeah.
Now, we can't talk about Shakespeare without talking about his language. What are some of the key things to notice about the language in A Midsummer Night's Dream?
Well, first off, Shakespeare uses a lot of words that might sound unfamiliar to us today.
Really?
Either they're words we don't use anymore, or they're words that had different meanings back then. The notes give some great examples.
Yeah, I was looking at those.
Like mewed, which means to be shut up or confined.
Okay.
Or dowager, which originally meant a widow who had a dower, which is like property or money she inherited from her husband.
I see.
Or pert, which meant lively or cheerful.
So we have to pay attention to how words are being used in context.
Yeah.
And then there's the way he switches between prose and verse, right?
Right. So the mechanicals, they mostly speak in prose, which is like everyday language. But the lovers and the fairies, they often speak in verse, which is more formal and poetic.
Yeah, I noticed that. It's like he's using different styles to create different moods and highlight different characters.
Exactly. And the notes also point out that Shakespeare uses a lot of rhyme in this play,
Oh, yeah.
which is interesting because it suggests that he was still developing his skills as a poet and a playwright.
So it's like a snapshot of him at a particular point in his career.
Okay.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch on some of the smaller details that I just love about A Midsummer Night's Dream, like Bottom's malapropisms. They're just so funny.
I know, right? Like when he says aggravate when he means irritate, or odious when he means odorous.
Right. It's like he's trying so hard to sound sophisticated, but he just ends up sounding ridiculous.
Totally.
And then there's the way the mechanicals are so worried about making their play realistic.
Yeah, they're worried about using a real sword or having a real lion on stage, and they come up with these hilarious solutions for representing things like moonlight and a wall.
Right, right. And then you have Theseus and Hippolyto watching their play and making all those snarky comments.
It's just so funny. And the notes also give us some great historical context, like explaining this game called Nine Men's Morris that was popular in Shakespeare's time, and the fact that Shakespeare seemed to know a lot about different kinds of flowers.
Oh yeah, he was clearly paying attention to the natural world.
Right. And then there are all these references to classical mythology and English folklore.
It's like he's pulling from all these different sources to create this rich, layered world. So as we come to the end of our deep dive, what are the key takeaways you'd want our listeners to remember about A Midsummer Night's Dream?
Well, we've learned about when the play was probably written, sometime around 1595, and where Shakespeare might have gotten his inspiration.
Right.
We've talked about the different storylines, the lovers, the mechanicals, the fairies, and we've discussed some of the big themes like love, imagination, and the power of dreams.
Right, and it really makes you think about how our own imagination shapes our reality, doesn't it? Especially in terms of our relationships and our understanding of the world around us.
Absolutely, and we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to discover in A Midsummer Night's Dream.
Right. We encourage everyone to go read the play or see it performed if you can, and to keep thinking about all those big ideas.
There's always something new to uncover in this amazing play.
Well, thanks for joining me for this deep dive. I hope you all enjoyed it.
It was a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time for another deep dive into a fascinating topic.
Yeah, see you then.
Until next time.
Bye.